did in the 80s.
You're up. I'm up. All right. I decided that I was no longer going to go to the pop culture fun stuff. I decided that I was going to weight this on heaviness, and I decided to go with this: the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, I almost put that down. I agree with that 100%.
Because the fall of the Berlin Wall, as far as I'm concerned, was the official end of the not the official end of the Red Scare, because the Red Scare is still going on. I don't care what anybody says. The Reds, as long as there's collusion in Russia, the Red Scare is still up for debate. But what it did officially do was end the separation of Germany from East Germany and West Germany, because I remember as a kid when they were changing the maps out.
Yeah.
Like, I remember that so vividly. It's like, yeah, this is an old map. We got to get a new map. But what it officially did was end the reign of terror that happened during World War II.
I also think that it's culturally significant as the herald of the end of the Cold War.
Yes.
Because this is when we really started to see that the Soviet Union was collapsing, and that it was just a couple years later then that they did collapse, and that was that.
And if you think about it, yeah, it called for the end of Cold War, but it was also and this is why I'm tying it into World War II. Mm-hmm. If not for World War II, we would have not have had the Berlin Wall. And
Absolutely.
We didn't have the Berlin Wall separating East Germany from West Germany.
Yes.
It wouldn't have caused all that political strife.
Yes.
So, yeah, the fall of the Berlin Wall finally put World War II and all that horribleness to bed, or at least for the most part. It ended the Cold War. It united Germany finally after all those years. Mm-hmm. And it collapsed the Soviet Union, which you start seeing the independent states rise up. And now we're in a time period where they're still trying to do. I don't want to get too heavy into that.
We won't get into today's politics, certainly, but I think I see where you're going.
If not for the fall of the Berlin Wall, none of that would have happened.
Yes.
And the world would be totally different right now.
Yes, and I think we all remember Mr. Gorbachev teared down this wall. Wow, what an amazing moment and an amazing statement that has just an indelible part of media at this point.
So as far as things moving forward, the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
May I see your pen?
Got it on there, yeah.
No, may I see your pen?
Oh, yes, of course. So I'm going to continue on the heavy part here.
Okay.
And my suspicions are this is on your list as well, and that's the AIDS epidemic.
Yes. I made two lists because I wasn't sure what I wanted on there and what I didn't want on there, and I lost the first list, and anything that remained in my brain to put on the second list, and I forgot that this was on my first list and decided to add it to my second list as well. But yeah, HIV and AIDS had a huge impact in the 80s that you can still feel today.
That is one of those things that arguably you could list in the 80s.
Yeah.
But you could also list in the 70s and the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
It was so impactful, and quite frankly, depending on where you are in the world, is still very impactful today.
Yes.
I think this is a very good time, and we don't make a lot of political statements, and I'm not even suggesting that this is per se, but we are fortunate enough to live in a first world country
we are.
With extremely good access to health care for most people. And as a result, we don't have near the people that die of full-blown AIDS anymore, because if you're able to afford the cocktail, it can pretty much, for most people, take away the predator's teeth, so to speak.
We have gotten to the point where medicine has been so synthesized that it doesn't. In some cases, it doesn't show up in a blood test anymore.
Yeah. So I mean, we're not.
Hopefully, I didn't misspeak on that.
No, that's okay. Correct. It's the viral load gets so low that it doesn't even register, and so. It's arguable whether we consider that a cure or not a cure, and there's some debate about that scientifically, as I understand it. But and again, I'm not a doctor or anything of the sort, but I do know that we've I think around the world, I think they've said that they've managed to cure 5 people or something like that. That it's it's not foolproof at this point, but it's done great things and we've made great strides. But those of us that were alive in that late 70s to mid 80s time frame, the number of people that were just falling over.
Yeah.
And those of you who are in the New York area, New York City area, and are old enough know that the effects of HIV on Times Square alone, whereas in the late 70s, Times Square was a hole. Can we call it that?
It was something special, man.
It was certainly a den of iniquity, and HIV did a number on destroying the sex industry and so on and so forth that was happening in Manhattan at that time, and not just there, but San Francisco and LA and all around the country. It had a very profound effect. I think one of the things that we're used to hearing regarding the history of HIV and AIDS is its impact on the LGBTQ community. Yep. But what we don't hear very much of is the impact that it had on people that were working in the adult industry, because most people in that industry didn't have health insurance. And so it wasn't being tracked, that they were getting sick and dying and so forth, but it obliterated that industry as well. So it's something to think about.
When we go and do our podcast, because, we plan on expanding on non-hilarity,
it'll be a lot more serious. Sure.
A lot more serious, because we're going to do like 80s tone. This is definitely one of those topics that came up repeatedly for us, because it can be looked at in my version and your version twofold because of what we bring to the table.
That's several year difference, and the impact that it has. I mean, people that were at my age, I mean, you got to that age where this was going to be a subject matter, so to speak, for yourself. And you were thinking, no, you're going to use whatever you need to make sure you're safe or whatever. That's how much HIV had a huge impact. I don't know if it was as much for you, was it?
May I continue?
Yes, I will.
Right.
Yes.
Because you're like, I got to say something.
Yeah.
Well, I looked at it. There are three things that came out of this topic that I feel is warranted to look at. One, medical technology and how medical technology evolved because of being able to combat AIDS and HIV,
sure.
and how medical technology, like as advanced as it is will always still be like one step behind preventing something that's going to happen before it happens, no matter what you do. Two, it's the conspiracy and the folklore and the hoo-ha that people will spew during the HIV and AIDS crisis, rolling over to how we view things as far as anti-vaccination, the whole COVID hoo-ha. I don't want to get down it because I know people are on different sides of the fence of it, but we have to recognize that stuff is there.
Well, certainly it historically holds water because it happened with smallpox. Yeah. It happened with HIV. It happened with coronavirus. The same types of things, even in completely different time periods, up to 100 years apart, we still respond the same way as human beings. So there's something to be said for that, sure.
And this is also why I feel that the basketball team, the Dream Team from the
I forgot about that.
From the 1992 Olympics, which I feel is like what a representation of the United States. It was a multicultural basketball team, and one of the players had HIV.
I forgot completely about that.
What a representation of the United States at that time, and they crushed everybody.
What was the country? There was a country that didn't want to play as a result of that, wasn't there?
I don't remember.
I seem to recall that in '92 there was. Somebody remembers? Please put it down.
I don't remember.
We're in the middle of a show, so we can't really look. But I do recall that there was a team that said, "Nope, we're not doing this because we might get sick or something like that." That they were afraid they were going to bump into Magic Johnson, and all of a sudden, again, just exactly what you were talking about with just not understanding how this worked, and that wasn't going to happen.
And what a representation, because you had. First off, you had all that talent. They all came from different backgrounds. They all came from different teams. They were all from different cultures. They all had different skin tones, if you want to go down that route. And they all accepted Magic Johnson for who he was. Sure. An amazing basketball player who would get you on the court and tear you apart. Yeah. And they went out and dominated with all of that.
I think one of the things about HIV that we can kind of wrap this up and put a bow on it is that, one of the things that it did culturally that was demonstrated how horrible we can be as human beings is that it touched our fears to the point where we began to make horrible judgments about people that were sick. And I will never forget the name Ryan White, who was a young child who was hemophiliac and contracted HIV as a result of the contaminated blood supply and the things that child was subjected to, because it was immediately assumed that he had to have got HIV this way, and was completely ridiculous. So it not one of our prouder moments for sure, and I will be very excited to talk about this subject in depth when we get to the podcast, because it is such an enormous impact on so much of culture, and it's really something. And not only, but personally as well, as I stated, that had to. I can't imagine when you came of age, it didn't have an impact on people your age as it did on mine.
Oh yeah, we were keyed in tuned and trying to find out as much information as we possibly could. I remember the special Nickelodeon news program trying to best explain it to kids as best they possibly could of what HIV is, and then how HIV turns into AIDS and how HIV isn't AIDS. But Nickelodeon's going through its own problems right now.
Yeah, they sure are. We'll skip that part.
Yeah, we're not going to go down that train. But I have one more thing on my list, and I figured that would be it.
Okay.
May I?
Yes, please.
All right. The last thing on my list: the war on drugs.
Ooh, I never thought of that one at all. Boy, that's a good one.
Yes.
Wow, that really is a good one.
Because nothing formed Ronald Reagan's presidency more than the war on drugs and the Just Say No and the DARE and the repercussions that happened because of the war on drugs, and where government money was being spent as far as the police go. And then it really highlighted what exactly the racial disparity was in the country.
Yes.
That is still resonating to today, and we wouldn't have had that exposure if not for the war on drugs.
Well, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. That's a huge impact on the decade for sure.
Yeah.
We
still feel today.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I still have 3 on my list. I'm surprised we didn't have more crossover than this. Really.
Oh, well, I probably thought about them and I was like, we'll just move on.
Let me see if you thought of this one.
Okay.
The birth of hip hop.
I wrapped that into MTV.
Okay.
I really did, because the birth of hip hop, the birth of punk rock. Well, not the birth of punk. Well, actually, yeah, hip hop was born.
Well, hip hop. Here's the thing. The reason
rise of hip hop, I will give you.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason, I might the birth word might be wrong here. We'll go with the rise of hip hop. The reason I listed it separately from MTV is because by the time it hits MTV, it's already huge in certain markets and everything, particularly here in the Northeast, because it comes out of New York.
Yes, it comes out of New York.
So by the time it was on MTV, we had already had at least where I was, we already had an exposure to breakdancing. We already had an exposure to Grandmaster Flash and all of these early guys that were heading this movement and everything, which means we had an exposure to rap, which is something that at that time was relatively new. So I have to say that and when you see where hip hop is today and its impact, its cultural impact. Yeah. If it's not for those early guys at that time, it doesn't happen.
I will expand on that.
Okay.
I will,
yeah, you're the music guy, please.
I will expand on that as far as hip hop, because you also got punk rock wrapped into there too. Got its birth and infancy in the 70s, but then started really branching out in the 80s. And this is where hip hop's commercialization really, really helped.
Yeah.
This was the first time you heard people talking about the subjects that they were talking about.
Yeah.
Really exposing. The punk rock was more in-house. But if not for the explosion of NWA,
oh gosh, yeah,
you would not have modern music the way it is today, where they were legitimately talking about what was happening in Compton,
Yeah, because
California.
the early days of hip hop, it was a lot more upbeat. And when they came around,
the stuff that you listened to,
yeah, the subject matter,
well, the stuff that was released on on the radio,
sure.
But as soon as the subject matter got blown up, and like now it became more of a social commentary, and I think that's where I was going with hip hop became social commentary for what the nation was going through.
Certainly the poor of the nation.
The poor of the nation. And you can understand why NWA was so upset and so angry and why it related to people. And now people are scared and terrified because this message from Compton, California was getting into places in Nebraska, Indiana, Wyoming.
Yeah. And it really was.
It was getting into the suburbs and people didn't like it and were scared.
This is where the corollary, I think, comes in with the punk movement, or before that, rock and roll, or any of these subversive styles of music that come out that, you know, the adults of the time are like, you know, just absolutely up in arms over, or whatever, that ultimately have a massive impact on our culture.
And if you consider what was happening, like 60s and 70s, really good bands, really good music. I mean, they were being socially conscious where they were, but if you look at the bands from the 80s and 90s, they really pushed the envelope, because there was a time period between the 70s and the 80s where everybody just wanted to party and have a good time and try to push through the social commentary that was going on. Yeah. Like, because that's when you have your hair metal bands, like, just came out of disco, and all disco is just like dancing and partying, and it's candy for your ears. And then hip hop and punk rock come along and are like, no, wake back up. This is what's really happening in the world, and you need to pay attention. Yeah. And how many advocates came out of that? And
oh gosh, yeah, a lot.
Yeah, and just based off of that, because that one song of F the Police. I mean, and why we shouldn't trust the police. It's like, yeah, they're given a badge, and you're told that you need to respect them, but then finding out that there's this other side to the... Not saying all police, like...
No. Well, that's not... We're talking on a social, for a social construct,
construct. Yeah. Because I'm sure... And it's just like everything else. There's bad apples in every bunch.
Well, and I think it also...
And holding them accountable for what they're doing.
I was about to say, I think because now you're starting to get this, where this bleeds into the 90s here. And certainly right about the same time, you had the Rodney King incident. Yes. And this began a whole national narrative on... You know, where does it become brutality? Where is there profiling going on? And so, again, all of that begins with that rise of hip-hop. And I think it's definitely a huge, huge impact on culture.
And talking about being a drug dealer, because that's the only way that you can actually make any money. Yeah. And then what happens to drug dealers.
I think what's sad is that...
Ice-T's, 6 a.m. Cops are knocking on my door.
I think what's really unfortunate is... in those early days, is that for middle America, is the message was lost because the subject was, oh, we can't talk about this. Yeah. But if they would have listened to the words, and this is where hindsight is so beneficial, if they would have been able to listen to the words, they would have heard that it's not that this was the choice that they were making because the alternative was going to be a doctor. Right. This was a choice because it was the only one they had. Yeah. And that's what I think for middle America was lost, and what led to the whole, we can't be listening to this, our children can't have this. All of a sudden there were warning labels on music. All that came from hip-hop and such. So
hip-hop and various items. And in fact, my parents really didn't have an issue with the music that I listened to when I became a teenager. It wasn't what I was listening to, it's that I understood what I was listening to and what the message was, instead of just going out there and causing problems. Yeah. It's like, this is why they're singing about this and how. So what's your next item?
We're going to continue in the music with the Thriller album.
Huh.
In terms of its sale, in terms of its success, in terms of what the videos did for MTV, you can just keep going. I mean, the impact of the Thriller album is enormous on our culture. Certainly on pop culture. Anyway.
Well, certainly on pop culture, I will say it was a blip, a moment in time. And yes, we got that wonderful Thriller dance, and we got that the expansion of what you can do with a music video because of the Thriller album.
Well, you also had Billie Jean. You had there were a bunch of songs on that album that were very successful.
This is a solid album.
Beat It.
Yeah, Beat It. But in the same vein, I wouldn't say one specific album like the Thriller album would do it, because at the same time, when you're looking at the Thriller album, you could easily slip in Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, because there were nothing but great songs on there.
We Are the World, obviously, the significance there could be.
Of We Are the World.
I see your point. I see your point there. You know what? We'll take that one off then.
Okay.
I'm gonna concede that one.
I didn't mean to.
No. This is a discussion, so I'm certainly willing to concede that one.
What I will do is offer up. How about 80s music in general?
Yeah.
Why don't we drop? Because if not for the 80s music and the evolution of, Guns N' Roses and Michael Jackson coming out of the Jackson 5.
Yeah.
Guns N' Roses came after the hair metal bands and are like, hey, everybody pay attention to this.
Well, certainly I think...
And kicked them in the teeth.
Yeah, certainly I think the sheer volume of music.
Yes.
But then the number of different genres of music that were handed to us at one time. Whereas if you listen to a song and it's from the 60s, you can go, oh, that's from the 60s. Yeah. If you listen to that's a 70s song. But the 80s, I mean, it was so expansive that there are songs that come out today and we're like, oh, that's like an 80s song.
Yeah.
It had a lasting impact for sure.
Because there were so many different albums that came out, and not saying that Michael Jackson may or may not, depending on where you sit, but you've got Michael Jackson, you got Prince, you've got Guns N' Roses, you've got Motley Crue, you got Madonna, you got Billy Joel. Yeah. You've got so many different artists that came out in the 80s that... you got AC/DC, you got all the punk bands and the hip-hop bands that we were talking about.
And then you also have to include the producers that came out at that time. Because, Quincy Jones, certainly if you're talking about his impact on the 80s, it's enormous. Yeah. So, again, I do think another list we're going to have to do one of these days is a list of people that we think had a massive cultural impact on the 80s.
Absolutely.
Because we're mentioning names throughout this thing that are... hugely
names. Relevant.
Yeah,
I mean, and the albums that you're talking about, or the artists that we're talking about, they're timeless. They're classic.
Absolutely.
I mean, you could get the same feeling that you could when you were 14, listening to them now. You're going to get a different message, but you're going to get the same feeling and have an emotional response to it.
Yeah. My last one, and I think this is interesting because when you look at the technology boom and you look at cable television and you look at all these different things.
I got to go feed the cats.
Yeah. The first launch of the space shuttle, which takes place April the 12th, 1981, when Columbia launches. Without that, you don't have the satellites that we have, which means you don't have a lot of the communication we have. You don't have it. That is an enormous moment. Plus, it leads to other moments, some of them notorious, like the Challenger explosion or whatever. But that first launch changes our entire world.
Okay. So I'm going to give you the same example that you gave me when we were talking about video games.
Okay.
All right? Follow me on this. It's not going to take too far. We already had space travel. All right.
We did.
Okay.
We did.
Hold on. We already had space travel.
We did.
And you could consider that previous space travel with the Apollo 11, the Apollo 13 as your Atari. What you're representing with this space shuttle is now we have gone from Atari to Nintendo, where it's opened up the entire world and has pushed everything further.
Yes.
It has taken the peak of technology and pushed it out there. Because you're right, we wouldn't have the satellites we wouldn't have had the space shuttles that we wouldn't have had, we wouldn't have had the space station to get everything up there. It moved the modern technology forward. And without that jump, we wouldn't be where we are today.
So maybe we should say it is the advancement of space travel?
Yes, let's go with that.
All right, very good. All right. Well, there it is. That is 16 culturally significant moments that we have come to together. I think considering we both came up with a list of 10.
Yeah.
And each of us essentially contributed 8 when you really think about it.
Well, and how about we do this? How about we do a part 2?
Okay.
A part two.
All right.
And you come up with 4 more, and I come up with 4
Ooh,
more.
okay.
And we come up with a list of 20. Because we're at 16. We're almost there, and I'm not satisfied with 16. That
All right.
just doesn't...
It's just not a round number.
It's not there yet.
All right. Well, and since we're going to come up with a few more here, folks, if you're watching this, and I've probably broken this up over several because this has been so long.
Yes, a
but,
very enjoyable conversation.
Yes, but please, by all means, if you have things that we have missed,
drop them in the comments.
throw them down there. Get in on the conversation. Who knows? We might look at yours and say, "Now that's better. We got to add that one." By all means, engage in the discourse here, and let's figure this out.
And who knows? Our list might go to 20, might go to 25, might go to 30. It all
Yeah, you
depends
never know.
on what you offer us, because these are historically accurate and historically important things that happened during the 80s that still affect us today.
Yeah, and here again, if you're interested in this idea of people, if you're interested in us exploring that, let us know that too, because I think that would be a very interesting one to talk about.
Yeah. When did the power windows come in for the car?
I believe that would have been the 70s.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look.
But isn't that interesting?
But certainly automobile advancement is something we should look at, because one of these things, whether it's the windows, the intermittent wipers, the something, analog brakes, something happened in the 80s. I'm sure that's auto-related. So, neither of us are car guys, so if you are, please let us know what we're missing here.
Well, Tawny Katane did her little dance on something. I mean... This is what I'm saying. I'm not saying, but I'm saying. But you know where I'm coming from.
I mean, I do. I mean, so nevertheless, I think this has been an amazing conversation. To close this out, and by the time this part hits, it's probably going to be a little late, but nevertheless, I'm going to mention it anyway. We this week, the week that we're recording this, a horrible tragedy took place in Baltimore, which of course is just right across the border for us. From Pennsylvania into Maryland. So we'd like to send our thoughts and prayers out to all who are affected by the collapse of the bridge, and to the folks that were on that boat and everyone involved. So we send our thoughts and our prayers and everything else.
Yes, and we understand that Baltimore is going to be a little tricky right now. Please be patient with everybody.
Absolutely.
We understand that there are a lot of thoughts going around right now. Please keep those thoughts to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe before you do, look up a little bit on physics and
and please understand that you can have as many thoughts as you had. There are still people who passed away from the tragedy. Don't make this about you. Make this about them.
Yeah, don't make it worse for their families and so forth. Let's be the good we want to see in the world. And with that, for Larry it's Jim. For Jim it's Larry. We will see you next time, allies.
I gotta pee. All right.
See you next time.
I drank all of this. Bye, Jim.
I don't know. Bye.